High Speaker HFY stood at the observation window of his diplomatic vessel, gazing down at Earth with a mixture of intrigue and apprehension. The planet was unremarkable at first glance. Another habitable sphere, blue and green, spinning lazily around its star. And yet, this insignificant world had done something no other species had. It had expanded into space with reckless abandon, ignoring the carefully laid diplomatic and economic frameworks that governed interstellar relations. It had fought wars, not just among itself, but against alien incursions, and somehow, impossibly, it had won. The Galactic Council had debated for decades about what to do with humanity. Some argued that Earth should be integrated peacefully, offering the species a chance to refine itself under galactic law. Others believed it was too dangerous, too unpredictable to be allowed into the fold. But ultimately, pragmatism had won out. Humanity had already proven it would not be ignored. And so, the Council had sent HFY. The shuttle carrying him and his diplomatic retinue descended through Earth's atmosphere, the protective plating of the craft shimmering against the sudden pressure. HFY's secondary arms folded behind his back, a subconscious sign of tension. The humans had insisted that the meeting take place in Washington, D.C., the political heart of one of their most powerful factions, the United States of America. The choice was strategic, certainly, but it also sent a clear message. The humans were not coming to the table as supplicants. They were inviting the galaxy to negotiate on their terms. The landing site was prepared. A vast complex adorned with their national symbols, flanked by armored vehicles and uniformed soldiers standing at stiff attention. A human delegation awaited them, and as HFY stepped onto Earth's surface, he found himself immediately unsettled. The humans were not solemn. They were not reserved. There was no formal display of reverence or awe, as was customary in diplomatic encounters with newly contacted species. Instead, there was an undeniable energy in the air, a barely restrained irreverence. A tall human in a military uniform stepped forward, flanked by civilians in dark suits. His chest was adorned with rows of colored ribbons, a sign of status or accomplishment. His face, lined with age, bore the unmistakable expression of someone who had seen too much and cared too little. "Welcome to Earth," the man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "I'm General Carter. I hear you're here to talk business." HFY inclined his head, his translator implant quickly parsing the human's dialect. "I am High Speaker HFY of the Galactic Council. I come with an offer of peace and cooperation." Carter grunted, then gestured toward the large building behind him. Yeah, let's get inside. Got a whole dog and pony show waiting for you." HFY's secondary eyelids flicked in a rapid blink. He wasn't familiar with the phrase, but he understood the sentiment. The delegation moved inside, and HFY took the opportunity to observe his host more closely. Humans were a paradox. Their physiology was unremarkable compared to many spacefaring species, bipedal, fleshy, carbon-based. Their technological advancements were impressive but lacked the refinement of older civilizations. And yet, their confidence, their sheer audacity, set them apart. They were a species that did not care for the expected order of things. Inside, they were led to a large conference hall, a sprawling chamber with a long table at its center. The humans took their seats with casual ease. Some leaned back, others propped their feet up. One of them, an older man with thinning hair and an expensive suit, was drinking from a steaming cup of some dark liquid, his eyes half-lidded with boredom. HFY remained standing. His kind did not sit during negotiations, a practice meant to reinforce the solemnity of diplomatic proceedings. "I wish to begin by—" A loud pop hiss interrupted him. One of the humans, a broad-shouldered man in civilian attire, had just opened a metal canister. He took a long sip, then set it down with a careless thud. "Sorry, go on." HFY's internal temperature fluctuated slightly. He continued, carefully choosing his words. "The Galactic Council recognizes humanity's unique position in the interstellar community. We extend an invitation to join us, to take a seat among the great civilizations of the galaxy. The humans exchanged glances. One of them, an official wearing a pin that marked him as an elected representative, folded his hands. And what does that mean for us exactly? It means access to our knowledge, our infrastructure, our trade networks, HFY explained. But it also means adherence to our laws. There are expectations. A smirk played at the edges of Carter's mouth. Laws, huh? Yes, HFY continued. Interstellar commerce regulations. Military limitations. The prohibition of independent planetary warfare. Resource distribution oversight. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then, one of the humans snorted. Another let out a low chuckle. The suited man with the drink shook his head with a wry grin. Carter leaned forward. Look, Speaker, I get it. You're trying to civilize the wild frontier. But let's be real here. You're offering us rules, restrictions. Meanwhile, we've got corporations already figuring out how to sell hamburgers to space whales, mercenary outfits looking to expand operations, and a billion people on the internet who will absolutely not take kindly to some alien council telling them what they can and can't do. HFY stiffened. You misunderstand. This is not an offer to be ignored. Oh, we understand just fine. Carter's grin didn't waver, but his voice carried an undeniable edge. You want to fold us into your little club because you're worried about us. You see the way we fight, the way we think. And you're wondering what happens when we stop playing on our own planet and start playing in your backyard. HFY's secondary arms tightened behind him. This was spiraling out of control. I assure you, the council only seeks. Buddy, interrupted the man with the drink, setting his cup down. You're talking to a country that threw a tea party into the ocean over a tax dispute. We do not do well with authority. Laughter rippled through the room. Not mocking, but something worse. Casual amusement, the kind that came from people who simply did not care. HFY had met leaders who ruled through fear, ones who wielded power with cold efficiency. But he had never encountered a species that looked at power itself and simply shrugged. He had expected resistance. He had not expected this. The meeting continued, but the outcome was clear. There would be no submission, no quiet assimilation into the galactic order. The humans were willing to talk, but they were not willing to bend. And beneath their humor, beneath their irreverence, there was something deeper, something unsettling. They were not afraid of the Galactic Council. And worse, they did not respect it. As HFY left the chamber, stepping back into the alien sunlight of this chaotic world, a single thought echoed through his mind with grim certainty. This species will change the galaxy, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do to stop it. HFY sat rigidly within the armored transport, the human-built machine rattling slightly as it sped toward the next stage of this so-called diplomatic exchange. The meeting in Washington had been unsettling enough, but now his host insisted on something they called a demonstration. What precisely they intended to demonstrate remained unclear. The humans, in their usual way, had been maddeningly vague about the details. Across from him, General Carter sat with one arm draped lazily over the back of his seat, his expression unreadable. The man exuded the same insufferable ease that all of his species seemed to possess, as if none of this, first contact, interstellar diplomacy, the fragile peace between their peoples, required any degree of solemnity. You seemed a little stiff back there, Speaker, Carter said, his voice edged with amusement. I take it things don't work like that in your council meetings. HFY folded his secondary arms behind his back, a gesture of restraint. The Galactic Council operates under strict protocols. There's order, discipline. We approach negotiations with the appropriate level of decorum. Uh-huh, Carter said, nodding in mock understanding. See, that's the problem. You're treating us like everyone else. Like we're going to play by the same rules. HFY narrowed his primary eyes. Are you saying humanity considers itself exempt from the established order? Carter grinned. I'm saying we don't give a damn about the established order. Now, I think it's time we show you why. The transport rumbled to a stop, and the doors hissed open. HFY stepped out onto a barren landscape, a controlled military range, according to his data feed. The air smelled of scorched earth and metal, and in the distance, great machines loomed, their angular frames radiating an aura of barely contained lethality. Soldiers in thick armor moved with a distinct lack of rigidity, their postures relaxed, their conversations casual, yet their weapons, primitive by galactic standards, were handled with unsettling familiarity. A group of officers stood near a cluster of vehicles waiting. One of them, a lean, sharp-eyed woman, stepped forward, her uniform marked with insignia Ekar didn't yet recognize. "Speaker HFY," she said, offering a curt nod. "Colonel Vasquez, I'll be overseeing today's demonstration." HFY dipped his head in acknowledgement. "What, precisely, do you intend to demonstrate?" Carter clapped him on the back, an entirely unnecessary and unwelcome gesture. "Relax, Speaker. We're just going to give you a little taste of how we do things." Vasquez raised a hand, signaling to the waiting soldiers. Across the field, mechanical behemoths hummed to life. HFY recognized them as war machines. Tanks, artillery platforms, air support craft. Such weapons were antiquated in the grand scale of galactic warfare, yet the humans carried themselves with the confidence of a species that had never learned the meaning of inferiority. A siren blared. The air cracked with the sound of gunfire and missile propulsion. The earth trembled as explosions bloomed in precise, devastating succession. HFY's secondary eyelids flickered as he processed the chaos. It was unorthodox. There was no carefully choreographed display, no cold, calculated efficiency. Human warfare was not a sterile affair. It was loud. It was reckless. It was a spectacle. And yet, despite its apparent disorder, it was brutally effective. A formation of soldiers advanced across the terrain, their movements seemingly uncoordinated, until HFY realized the truth. There was no rigid structure, no blind adherence to a singular doctrine. Instead, the humans adapted on the fly, their individual actions shifting to fit the flow of combat in ways that could not be easily predicted. Carter watched the speaker closely. "You get it now?" HFY turned to him, his expression carefully neutral. "Your tactics are unconventional." "Yeah," Carter said with a smirk. "That's a nice way of putting it." HFY could not deny the effectiveness of what he was seeing. The Galactic Council's forces prided themselves on precision, discipline, and hierarchy. Their battles were won through superior strategy and technological supremacy. But humans embraced chaos. They reveled in it. Their warriors carried themselves like gamblers in a high-stakes game, fully aware of the risks yet utterly fearless in the face of them. The demonstration continued, shifting from infantry maneuvers to long-range bombardments. Each display carried the same signature, an effortless combination of brutality and ingenuity. Soldiers joked as they worked, their camaraderie evident even in the heat of simulated battle. The concept of fear, of rigid obedience, seemed alien to them, and that, HFY realized, was what truly set them apart. Other species feared war. They saw it as a grim necessity, a last resort. But for humans, conflict was woven into their very being. They did not merely endure war. They thrived in it. A final explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the air, and silence fell over the range. The demonstration was over. Vasquez turned to HFY. "Thoughts?" HFY hesitated before speaking. "Your methods lack refinement, yet they are undeniably adaptable." Carter laughed. "Buddy, refinement's for people who expect things to go according to plan. We prefer results." HFY studied the general. "You truly believe that your way is superior?" Carter's smirk faded slightly. "I think our way is different, and difference is what wins wars." Before HFY could respond, a soldier jogged over and handed Vasquez a small device. She glanced at the screen, then turned to Carter. "You're going to want to see this." Carter took the device, his brows furrowing. Then he let out a low whistle. Well, that didn't take long. HFY's primary eyes narrowed. What has happened? Carter flipped the screen around, showing a rapidly spreading data feed. Your council buddies? Yeah. They just put out an official statement. Something about humanities, concerning unpredictability and the need for containment measures. HFY felt a chill pass through his circulatory system. Containment? Vasquez's expression darkened. That's one way of saying they're considering a preemptive strike. For the first time since arriving on Earth, HFY felt a true sense of unease. The Council had feared humanity's rise, but he had hoped, that negotiations could temper their concerns. Now, it seemed that fear had taken root, and fear, among the great civilizations of the galaxy, was often the precursor to war. Carter sighed and handed the device back. Well, Speaker, looks like your bosses just made a real dumb move. HFY glanced back at the battlefield, where human soldiers laughed and exchanged casual remarks, utterly unconcerned by the implications of what had just transpired. They weren't worried. They weren't even surprised. And in that moment, HFY understood something with absolute clarity. The humans had expected this. And worse, they were ready. The sky above Earth burned with the brilliance of incoming fire. Vast streaks of plasma cut through the atmosphere like the claws of a vengeful god, their trajectories precise, methodical, inevitable. HFY stood at the reinforced windows of the command bunker, his secondary arms pressed tightly to his sides as he watched the first wave descend. The Galactic Council had made its decision. Humanity had been given a single ultimatum: surrender and submit to oversight or be neutralized as an existential threat to galactic stability. The response had been immediate. The humans had laughed. Then they had begun preparing for war. And now war had come. Carter stood beside him, arms crossed over his broad chest, his face betraying none of the urgency that hummed through the command center. The humans had known this was coming. They had anticipated it the moment the Council had sent its first delegation. They just hadn't been sure when. Those will hit in about 45 seconds, Vasquez reported from the nearby table, where a dozen screens displayed orbital trajectories, incoming fleet formations, and a rapidly shifting battle map. They're targeting strategic infrastructure first: power grids, comm relays, transport hubs. Standard doctrine: cripple the logistics, make the war unsustainable before it starts. HFY's voice was tight. They are offering you a chance to surrender. Carter exhaled sharply through his nose. Yeah? And how do you think that plays out? HFY had no answer. He knew the Council's methods. There would be no mercy. Humanity had been deemed too volatile, too unpredictable. The war would not end with negotiations. It would end with Earth a scorched husk, its people reduced to a cautionary tale. Yet the humans had not evacuated. They had not pleaded for peace. They had dug in. A klaxon blared through the bunker as the first wave struck. The ground trembled beneath them, deep vibrations rippling through concrete and steel. The impact points flashed red on the tactical displays. Then something changed. Vasquez grinned. They're hitting dummies. HFY's primary eyes widened. Dummies? Carter chuckled, his expression darkly amused. You think we'd just sit around and let them drop fire on our heads? We fed them bad intel. Every strategic target they just hit? Empty. Fake infrastructure. We relocated vital assets days ago. On the screens, the Council's precision bombardment struck false targets. Power grids that no longer connected to anything. Communications towers that transmitted only automated loops. Transportation hubs already emptied of critical resources. The first strike, meant to cripple Earth's ability to resist, had achieved nothing but wasted munitions. Vasquez tapped the screen. Our turn. From hidden installations across the planet, launch silos yawned open. Missiles streaked into the sky, their trajectories curling like the fangs of an unseen predator. The Council's fleet, locked in bombardment formation, was momentarily exposed. The counterattack was brutal. Kinetic rods, primitive by interstellar standards, but devastating in atmosphere, punched through shielding and tore through hulls. EMP bursts cascaded through enemy formations, scrambling targeting arrays and turning the Council's careful synchronization into chaos. Human fighter craft, smaller and faster than their counterparts, weaved through disoriented formations like predatory fish, striking at weak points with ruthless efficiency. HFY could scarcely believe what he was seeing. The Galactic Council was larger, older, more technologically advanced. Yet in the span of minutes, their battle plan had collapsed. The humans had outmaneuvered them, not through superior firepower, but through sheer, audacious cunning. Carter leaned in, eyes gleaming with something fierce. You bureaucrats always assume wars are won with clean strategies and overwhelming force. You don't get it. Wars aren't won by the side that should win. They're won by the side that refuses to lose. A fresh alert pulsed across the screen. The Council's fleet was shifting formation, adapting, rallying for a second push. The bombardment hadn't worked. Now, they would deploy ground forces. Here they come, Vasquez murmured. Drop pods rained from the sky, hurtling toward the planet's surface like angry meteors. The Council's soldiers were disciplined, elite, conditioned for high-efficiency planetary engagements. Against a standard opponent, they would be an unstoppable force. They were not facing a standard opponent. As soon as the first pods hit the ground, the landscape erupted. Entire sectors of the battlefield were rigged with hidden explosives, mines, and automated turrets. The moment the Council troops disembarked, they were met with a storm of precise, overwhelming fire. Human defenders did not meet them in open formations. They struck from cover, from pre-dug tunnels, from seemingly abandoned structures that turned out to be fortifications. They did not adhere to predictable battle doctrines. They ambushed, misled, withdrew, then struck again from unexpected angles. Carter watched the carnage unfold with a grim satisfaction. They came here expecting an occupation. What they got is a goddamn insurgency. HFY had no response. The truth was undeniable. The Council's forces were fighting for order. The humans were fighting for home. One of the tactical officers turned. General, we just intercepted enemy comms. Their high command is spooked. They weren't expecting this kind of resistance. Carter nodded, unfazed. Of course they weren't. They thought we'd break. HFY turned to him. Your people are outnumbered, outgunned. How long can you sustain this? Carter's gaze didn't waver. Long enough, a deep, shuddering explosion rocked the command center. The Council had begun targeting deeper into human defenses, probing for weaknesses. The battle was far from over. HFY exhaled slowly. He had come to Earth as a diplomat. He had tried to reason, to mediate, but now, as he watched an interstellar empire struggle against a species that simply refused to yield, he understood something. Humanity was not fighting for victory. They were fighting to deny their enemy victory. They were fighting to make every inch of progress so costly, so agonizing, that the Council would have no choice but to reconsider. And as much as it pained him to admit it, HFY was beginning to suspect they might succeed. Carter turned, offering him a wry smile. Still think we should have surrendered? HFY did not answer, because for the first time, he wasn't sure which answer was correct. The air on Earth was heavy with the scent of scorched metal and ionized atmosphere. Fire still burned in the distance, casting flickering shadows over the ruined cityscape. HFY stood on the shattered balcony of what had once been the Galactic Council's primary command post, now nothing more than a skeletal ruin of reinforced steel and alien alloys. The war had not ended in a decisive victory. It had ended in exhaustion. The Council's forces had underestimated the humans at every turn. They had expected resistance, but not this. Not the unrelenting defiance, the refusal to fight by any known rules, the sheer unpredictability of an enemy that saw war as an extension of its very nature. Every calculated strike the Council had made had been met with something it had never accounted for. A species that did not break, that did not surrender, that adapted to every setback with an almost infuriating tenacity. Carter approached from behind, his usual smirk absent. His uniform was torn, his face smudged with soot and blood, some of it, HFY suspected, not his own. He moved like a man who had been fighting for weeks without rest. Because he had. "Council's pulling back," Carter said, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "Not officially, of course. They'll call it a strategic realignment or some other bureaucratic nonsense. But they're done. They don't have the stomach for this kind of fight." HFY exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment pressing into him. "They will not admit defeat. They don't have to," Carter said, staring out over the ruined battlefield. "They just have to leave, and they're already doing that." The Council's retreat had been staggered at first, small withdrawals disguised as tactical repositioning. Then entire battalions had gone dark, refusing orders to continue a campaign that no longer made sense. Reports had come in from across the galaxy, unrest among member species, protests against the war, even outright refusals to contribute further resources. The iron grip of the Council was loosening, not because of human might, but because humanity had forced them to question their own certainty. HFY turned to face Carter fully. "Your species has rewritten the rules of engagement. This war was meant to demonstrate your place in the galactic order. Instead, it has fractured that order beyond repair." Carter huffed a tired laugh. "Yeah, well, turns out people don't like fighting wars they can't win, especially not ones they don't have to fight." HFY had spent his life believing in the Council's doctrine, that peace was maintained through order, that stability required control. But Earth had been a lesson in something different. The humans had not fought for dominance. They had not fought for conquest. They had fought because no other choice had been left to them. And now the Council, once the unshakable pillar of galactic governance, was crumbling under the weight of its own hubris. A transmission alert flickered on a nearby console. Vasquez's voice came through, rough but steady. "We're getting word from the inner colonies. Some of the member species are breaking away. Open defiance. They're refusing to send reinforcements. Some are even offering to negotiate with us." Carter's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. That was fast. HFY felt the full gravity of what was happening settle onto his shoulders. The war had not just been a battle between humanity and the Council. It had been a test of the very foundation of galactic power, and the Council had failed that test. "You've changed everything," he murmured. Carter shook his head. "Nah, we just reminded everyone that change was always an option." The sound of distant engines rumbled through the sky. A Council warship, one of the last still stationed in orbit, was breaking away, its thrusters glowing as it left Earth's gravity well. It would not return. For the first time since his arrival, HFY did not know what came next. The future was uncertain, shifting, filled with possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. The old order was dying. What replaced it would depend on those who chose to shape it. Carter glanced at him, eyes sharp despite his exhaustion. "So, Speaker, what's it gonna be? You heading back to your people? Or are you sticking around to see what comes next?" HFY hesitated, then looked back at the sky, where the Council's fleet was vanishing into the void. Once, he would have followed without question. Now, he wasn't so sure. Perhaps, for the first time, it was time to make his own choice.